Good morning. Before we dive into today's presentation, I want to start off by asking everyone a few questions. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have felt the need to be excellent in some part of your life? Whether it's in your academics, a sport, a game, or a relationship. Alright, has anyone ever felt the need to look a certain way, maybe due to a trending makeup style or aesthetic? Okay, so like some of you, numerous individuals around the world actually share the same sentiment, and no one is alone in this aspect. For example, let's take a look at the student. We'll call him Jeremy. Jeremy's a sophomore in high school who's built up the reputation for being a high-achieving student with a pristine academic background. This means he has high grades and a perfect GPA, which he plans to use for his college applications. Now, Jeremy knows that he must constantly excel if he wants to succeed, and therefore he pushes himself to provide quality work to his teachers. And in fact, for one of his assignments, he spent a total of 5 hours writing, and his process consisted of first tackling a paragraph and then taking a lot of time to edit it until everything felt just right. Now, it's very easy to think that this is such an admirable quality to have, and even Jeremy's teachers believe this because on all of his submissions, they're always saying, "Good job," and "Keep up the great work." And Jeremy's constant attention to detail may even push some people to think, "Wow, I really want to be like this guy." But everyone who knows the calm and successful Jeremy has only seen the true surface of this behavior. So, what is Jeremy's true nature? In reality, Jeremy is very insecure of his capabilities, and he pressures himself to always be flawless, and his desire to always perform at a high standard pushes him to be highly observant of small flaws and overly critical of mistakes, and these are just of the few defense mechanisms that he's developed in order to combat his fear of failure. Now, what I just described to everyone is an example of a perfectionist or someone who deals with perfectionism. Not everyone here may exactly identify with Jeremy, but at some point in your lives, you may have had the same thoughts or feelings as him, and that's because our society tends to encourage people who have perfectionist tendencies. But what many people don't realize is that perfectionism is also a double-edged sword. While it can help someone be successful, it can also be very toxic to people, and those stuck in its vicious cycle are at risk for many catastrophic consequences. So, my name is Zinara Lopez, and in today's presentation, my goal is to reveal the imperfections of perfectionism, specifically the destructive quality of this trait, and how our society perpetuates it. So, talking about the implications of this disorder requires us to first define perfectionism and to just get to know it in its entirety. So, what is perfectionism? Well, according to Haley Shafir, who's a licensed mental health counselor and addiction specialist, perfectionism is a personality trait characterized by high standards, rigid expectations, and specific ideas about how to achieve a desired outcome. Now, when it comes to this behavior, everyone creates and applies standards to their lives in their own manners, but in the field, researchers have categorized these tendencies into one of 3 types. So we have self-oriented, socially prescribed, and other-oriented perfectionisms. And each type is characterized by specific qualities, but regardless of whichever one a person has, everybody who's a perfectionist usually exhibits the same symptoms. So for example, a perfectionist, like our friend Jeremy, has high standards and pressures themselves to meet these expectations. They have a fear of failure. They're extremely ambitious, yet constantly insecure. They have a struggle overlooking small mistakes, so they'll tend to overthink. And they also have a struggle overworking because they'll constantly spend time trying to fix these flaws. Now, living in a constant state of worry while trying to achieve these impossible standards is a reality that many people around the world are currently facing, and it's consuming our society. It's exhausting them. But it's important to remember that we can't exactly blame people for developing perfectionism because it isn't something that's entirely innate. Instead, it's the culmination of gradual societal and environmental pressures that are leading our world towards its downfall. Now, there are several factors that can lead to perfectionism, but there are 3 that stand out for being the most influential. So, what are they? One of the first to consider is the education system and the competitive and demanding environments that they foster. By implementing point systems and smiley face scales, instructors begin to condition students to think in a me against them mindset from a very young age, though this habit isn't maladaptive yet. But as the students progress in grade level, the expectations for academic performance and behavior intensify, leading some students to believe that they need to have an outstanding record just to succeed and get ahead in life, although this isn't the truth. To make matters worse, some schools and academic programs are mainly merit-based, and they only select a few students for opportunities, recognition, and prizes, meaning that competitiveness increases among thousands of students when it comes to academic achievement, and an aggressive setting like this can really push a student to be a perfectionist and to carry this trait over into college or even the workplace. And it's actually been proven by a study conducted by psychologist Thomas Curran, who created an investigation on college students between the late 1980s and 2016. He found that a student's drive to score flawless scores and to compare them to their peers shows a rise in meritocracy, and young people are responding by creating unrealistic standards for themselves, and this is leading to a rise in perfectionism among millennials. Now, this research only shows that while schools are meant to be a place for development and learning, lately they've just become more about the competition and the numbers associated with academic excellence rather than with growth. And such an intense focus on this can lead students down a very dark road. But this isn't the only thing to worry about. There are also specific teacher policies, such as the strict makeup policy or one tribe policies, that are contributing to rising perfectionism among the younger generations because they're pressuring students to just submit flawless work time after time. And while these are meant to instill discipline, sometimes what they do is that they create zero room for failure, and this can eventually hinder personal growth because sometimes failure is necessary to succeed. Now, from personal experience, working on assignments with only one submission has made me more of a perfectionist because I start to worry about how my work is, and I just edit it, and I just want it to be perfect, even though sometimes it doesn't need revising. And this is a habit that's very exhausting, but it's inspired me to talk more about perfectionism with other people. And after interviewing friends and classmates about the situation, I found out that a lot of the same fears and emotions that I have regarding all of this are actually mutual. And one student who I interviewed, who wishes to stay anonymous, mentioned that a lot of these policies actually do push him to be a perfectionist and to aim for 100s every time he's working. And two other students from different grades and varying in age also agreed with us, saying that not only is it hard, the fact that some teachers only allow for one submission, but it's difficult too when teachers assign multiple activities within a short period of time and still expect quality work. Now, from this, it's very clear that there are several educational pressures that can lead to perfectionism, and the fact that one, the system is the same, and two, students of varying age and grade report the same issues only shows that we're allowing the cycle to continue, rather than improving the system and creating it into an environment where people aren't so afraid to make mistakes. And this was the topic of our conversation for quite a while, but it eventually led to another factor that also contributes to perfectionism, and that is toxic parenting styles. So from a very young age, babies begin to imitate their parents' thoughts, behaviors, and mannerisms. And as teenagers, they internalize all actions and words directed at them. And while this is very important for character, personality development, and eventual interactions in the world, this can be problematic when parents raise their children with negative parenting styles. One of the most harmful approaches acknowledged by psychologists is the demanding parenting style, and which is characterized by parents having high expectations for their child and just feeling disappointment when they don't meet these expectations. These parents also see their children as an extension of themselves and will tend to derive a lot of their self-worth from whatever they do, or like their achievements. Another harmful and dangerous approach is the critical parenting style, which, as the name suggests, the parent is very harsh with their child, and they will probably condemn like an aspect of their personality or behavior rather than providing gentle feedback. Now, this can be suffocating for the child, and it can even feel like as if they have no control over their life, or they can't really express themselves freely. And over time, dealing with either one of these styles can push them to try to find some balance and to cope with the situation by satisfying their parents, and this trend can lead to perfectionism. And it's actually been proved by another study that was conducted by Thomas Curran, who found that perceptions of parental expectations and parental criticism not only positively correlate with perfectionism, but also are rising over time among young people. Now, I've mentioned that perfectionism is very exhausting, so any child who really endeavors to reach this ideal version of themselves to satisfy their parents will often be met with a lot of doubt and low self-esteem, and these negative habits can cloud their judgment, and because again they're trying to reach for perfection, they don't really realize they're in this toxic cycle. But once again, this is because it isn't really talked about enough in our society. We just continue to really encourage anyone who has these habits, because in the eyes of community members, these qualities and traits are seen as future markers of success, so we are more likely to reinforce them. But things get even worse when we're just constantly reminded of the perfection that we should all achieve. But you guys may be wondering, how does that even happen? But there's one word: social media. Nowadays, social media has a very powerful grasp over everyone's lives, and by using constant notification bells and advertisements, these pervasive platforms make it nearly impossible for us to escape their carefully curated feeds of photoshopped selfies, edited vacation vlogs, and other altered images. Now notice that the keywords here are photoshopped, edited, and altered. While social media provides a lot of useful services, it can also create a very unrealistic standard that people should achieve. And it creates a very distorted reality as a result of that. And what many people also forget is that influencers can also contribute to the problem, because sometimes they'll go through like two extreme lengths to really stage parts of their lives, and either that's just to meet the perfect reality that they've already created online, or just to meet some requirements that other celebrities are establishing in that moment. But at the end of the day, all of this really goes back to how everybody's just feeding into each other's delusions. Influencers are affecting audience viewers, and that's making them feel like they need to compare themselves to those people that they see online. And in the end, what happens is that a lot of people feel as if they need to fabricate their own lives to really reach this perfect routine that is seen on all of these platforms. And the reason why a lot of people don't really realize they're in this toxic cycle where they're just constantly seeking perfection is because we're so heavily dependent on these apps, with 59.9% of the global population and 92.7% of all internet users navigating social media platforms. So people don't really have a lot of time to really take a step back and see how social media is affecting them. And it's now harder because we're incorporating Snapchat and Instagram into our line of work, making it even harder for us to exclude the influence of social media from our lives and to stop ourselves from developing these habits of perfectionism. But unfortunately, we're starting to see the results and consequences of this among the youth. Now, I looked up some research articles, and I'll just sum up what we found. So, social media is actually increasing levels of perfectionism among teenage girls, and it's also forcing a lot of teenagers to mask their own sadness with happiness online just so that they can fit in. Now, it's very clear that from all of this, we can conclude that perfectionism isn't a pretty trait, and it's something that it's harming us. It's a terrible quality that we've allowed to run rampant now more than ever because of factors like social media. But if we pretend that everything is okay and we just disregard this problem, it's going to become even harder to reverse the effects of perfectionism. For this reason, it's so important that we begin to learn about it and the effects that it can have on us in the long run. So far we've talked about the types of perfectionism, its signs and symptoms, and potential causes. But what can happen if someone is unaware of this information, or if they just continue to disregard the problem? The most obvious answer is that perfectionism will continue to develop and is going to have major consequences in our lives. For example, procrastination. Perfectionists tend to overthink a lot, and because of this, the overwhelming pressure that comes from overthinking can often paralyze them and prevent them from making decisions when they need to, or just delaying a lot of their work. Another consequence is stagnation. Perfectionists who overthink and get into the habit of doing this often do this because they have a fear of failure. And because they have a fear of failure, they will often stop themselves from going out into the world and trying to find new opportunities and try to succeed, or maybe even learn from their mistakes. And because they're stalling for so long, they really harm themselves and stunt their personal, emotional, and mental growth. Another problem that can arise from perfectionism is relationship problems. Perfectionists, some of them, may have a tendency to set very high standards for their partners, their significant others, family members, and friends. And when these people don't meet their expectations, the perfectionist may feel like the person isn't really respecting them, or they just aren't cooperating with them, and this can lead to a lot of tension. And if the perfectionist doesn't solve this, then the relationship can end up breaking. And finally, and most concerning of all, perfectionism can lead to low confidence and doubt. Perfectionists always have an idea about how they want to accomplish things, and when they don't do this successfully, they'll often get frustrated. And studies have shown that because of this, a lot of perfectionists will begin to criticize themselves very harshly, and this can eventually lead to suicidal tendencies. And this is the worst outcome that I've described out of all the others. And it really just shows that perfectionism has a lot of power over us, to the point that it can even push us toward death. And that's what a lot of people don't really realize when they're encouraging it in others. So what do we have to learn from this? From the outside, perfectionists look like they have their life together, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Instead, perfectionists face a distorted reality where they believe that they need to be flawless so that they can avoid being what they think are failures and just worthless. And our society hasn't really acknowledged this, because still we continue to plant the seed of perfectionism in the minds of young children, and with pressures such as the ones that I described, like aspects of our education system, toxic parenting styles, and social media, perfectionism begins to grow. But just like a plant can become an invasive species, perfectionism can become a very destructive force and eat away at people's lives and cause a lot of harm. But this isn't something to fear. The reason I decided to talk about this in the first place is because I believe knowledge is power, and by learning about perfectionism, we're equipping ourselves with the ability to beat it. And psychologists actually believe that this is one of the first steps towards managing perfectionism. We need to recognize it. And from there, psychologists say that we can even manage our own perfectionism by implementing other techniques in our lives, such as setting attainable goals, making to-do lists, being more mindful about our habits, and just learning to getting comfortable with disappointment. And even if you aren't a perfectionist, this still applies to you, because you can use this information to prevent yourself from getting stuck in the habit of perfectionism, and you can even go and out and talk to other people about it. So when we all eventually leave this classroom, I encourage you all to make a change. Reflect within, but also look out for others. We all have the opportunity to prevent the rise of perfectionism if we just continue to talk about its dangers. We can foster a community, an environment where people aren't so afraid of making mistakes, and instead they can embrace failure with grace and enthusiasm. Thank you.